Hello and welcome back to SketchUp Assist. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a few lines of Ruby code to create a material list like this for this project. Now, before we get started, I want to acknowledge that there are extensions out there that are quite useful and sophisticated that can provide cut lists from projects such as Open Cut List or Cut List. So while you may look at this as largely for educational purposes, there is some practical value. It also allows you to potentially longer term create more sophisticated applications geared specifically to your needs. But having said that, certainly a very popular application is Open Cut List. Okay, so let's get started. Start under the window drop down, and let's open the Ruby code editor. And I'm going to drag it over here and kind of position things quickly so I can try to keep everything on screen. And I'm going to go ahead and under the tools, under the editor, I'm going to show the Ruby console. That up, I'll expand it a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to start off with is we're going to create a group over here. I'm going to make this a group. It doesn't have to be anything special. I'm just going to make a copy of it here, drag it so that we have a couple of objects in our project. Okay. And now let's get started with some of the code that we're going to need. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a model. Okay. And so this is just saying that our model that we're going to act on here is the active model. So if we have multiple models open, it would be whichever one we have active in front of us here. And we can look at that in a few minutes, what that actually means. And then I want to grab the entities from that model. So I'm going to take the object that I just created, and I want to grab the active entities. Okay. Now, if we were to look at this now, you would see that there's just this one entity. It's not super informative for us at this point. And so we've got a little bit to do here to kind of try to extract out some useful information here. But nonetheless, we did create this object that represents the current active entities in the project that we have. So let's first off start off by just creating a loop over the entities. And we're going to use the .each functionality from Ruby. And we're going to create basically a variable each time we loop over it that is called entity. And right now we're just going to print that entity out. And then we'll close off that loop with that. Let's get rid of this. Okay. And now let's run this. Okay, so now we see some things that are starting to look a little different. So now we have these two groups that are getting reported in this loop. Okay, so we made a little progress. Now we're actually kind of breaking down the groups that we have. Okay, so now we're going to create basically a structure to hold the information on our material. And in Ruby, this is called a hash. It's very much like a dictionary if you are familiar with other programming languages such as Python. It is a key value pair. And so you can have a set of key value pairs in this structure. So we'll be using this structure to store some information as we move forward. Right now, we're just creating an empty container to sort of placeholder for that. Okay, so what we're going to try to do now is to start pulling some useful information out of this object. Right now, as you can see, this isn't super useful for creating material list. So let's start working on that a little bit. So let's work on parsing the entity. Okay, so where we are now, we are looping over these entities, or over the active entities on the page, and we can see that we have two groups in here, but as far as kind of getting a useful material list out of there, we're not quite there. This sort of non-human readable notation here is a bit of an obstacle for us. So let's take a look at how we get around that with SketchUp. And so what I want to do is actually, I want to add a couple of more objects in here. And this is just really so we can have like a couple of clearly different groups. Now, the way that we get around this notation is by using tags. So we're going to open up the tag functionality, and we're going to create a couple of tags. And I'm just going to give this a pretty generic names here. And we're going to come in and tag those. And then I'm going to create another one. And I'm going to tag my cylinder. Okay, let's run this one more time. Okay, now we will see we do have three groups in here now, but we haven't made a lot of progress. But there's a very quick way to make progress, and that is to pull in the layer associated with those entities. And now if we run this, now things clear up significantly. Okay, so we see our layer 0, which is a default layer, and that is basically what you would see here is the untagged. And then you're effectively seeing the new layers. And so since we're looking at the layer of the object, we're assuming that objects tagged are the same objects. So, imagine if I was building a deck, and I had 2x8 joists that were, say, 16 feet long. I would have several of those in my deck. I would tag all of those joists with the appropriate tag, and then it would find basically all copies of that. So effectively what we've done here is we found all copies of groups that are associated with the tag box. And likewise for cylinder, we found the single copy that's associated with the cylinder. And if we come in and we make a copy of this, notice it's tagged. When we copy it, we keep a copy of the tag. And if we come in and run it, we now see that there are multiple copies of both of those, as we would expect. Okay, so that's good. Now what we want to work on is just a way to summarize these values. So we can now, we now have the values. We just want to basically add those materials to our list and keep account of how many instances we have of each of those tags. And so we're going to create a function now, and we're going to call it parse entity, and we're going to receive the entity, and we will want to end our function down here at some point. Now what we want to do is get rid of this call. So we're going to keep our loop here, and our loop is going to loop over all of the entities we have. In this case, really 4 main entities we care about right now. We want to loop over those, and we want to call this new function that we've created, and we want to pass it this variable that we're creating each time we loop. So basically each time we loop over each one of these, we have the object associated with each of these copies. We're going to pass that to the parse entity function. And what we want to do is we want to look in our material hash here. We want to see if that entity layer is already assigned. So if box is already in that list, or if cylinder is already in that list, what we want to do is we want to count. So current count will equal. Okay, so what we're really doing is just grabbing the value that's associated with that key. And so this is the key. So you can kind of think of the this structure as having, for example, box equals 2, cylinder equals 2. And what we're doing is grabbing these values. So we'll say, what's the current value for box? We get that by just referencing that particular key value, or so that particular key, which returns the value. And likewise, if the key is cylinder. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update that value because we have a new instance of it. And so we're going to say the new value is the previous value. Now you could clean this up and put it in a single line, but it's just a little more readable here. So we say, okay, we found a new entry for a key that already exists in our material hash. We want to get the current count for that. And then we want to update that value of that key by incrementing the count by 1. So we found one of them, we want to add 1 to our list. Otherwise, if the current layer is not in, oops, and I just realized I didn't type this out. If that current layer name is not in the list, then we want to add it. So we want to come in, we want to create the instance for this, and we're going to set it equal to 1. Because what we're saying is we found the first instance. So for example, as we iterate through this list, we'll find the first instance of box. So when we check to see if that key exists, it will be false, which will mean we'll go to the else statement and we will create that entry and we will set the value to 1, since that's the first instance of that layer that we found. Then when we come to the second instance of box here, when we come through here, we will find that it exists because we just created it in the step before. We will say, what's the current count? In this case, it would equal 1. We will increment that by 1 and save that value. We just want to close this off. Okay, so there's our logic. Let's run this. Now you'll notice that our output changed. We're not really outputting anything right now. And so we want to come down and we could follow this through and put statements, but what we will do is go ahead and we'll use our loop again. And now we're going to actually get 2 values out of here. Since this is a key value part, our key value pair, we're going to get material type and count as individuals. And then we can do some kind of custom output here. So let's go this. And what we're doing is referencing these variables within a string. So this is this notation, the pound, curly bracket. And then we'll close that off, and then we'll close off this loop with an end statement. Okay, so again, what we have done so far, we came in, we've grabbed our active model, we grabbed the entities in that model. We're looping through all of the entities and passing the values of each of those entities. In this case, it would be these. We're passing that information to this function that simply comes in and adds it to this hash if it doesn't exist and sets the current count, or it updates the count if it's already in the hash. And so let's run this now. And there we go. So little cleanup that we can do on our output, but you can see for the box hash, we have 2. For the cylinder hash, we have 2. Just to clarify the behavior here, let's run this again. Okay, you can see we now have 3 of the box and 2 of the cylinder. So that's good, but we probably, this format's not great. We probably would like to get this out of this format, and really would probably like to get this into a file so that we can take that list and then, for example, in Excel or some other spreadsheet, we could go actually use it, put prices on it, and start doing some calculations around costs or whatever you may want to do. So let's just do this last step here, which is to create a CSV. So we're going to require the package CSV. We're going to create a variable So you'll see where these get used in a minute. Okay, and now we want to open a CSV file. I'm going to pass it my path. You would update your path here to match what you have. And we're going to do right. Pass this this variable into this loop. So into that variable, we want to pipe the information. Okay, and this is our header list that we saved. And then what we're going to do is loop over our material again. So material.each, so much like we did up here. And what we're going to pass is the single value. And if we want, we could just come down here and put something just to kind of show that we made it through the full process. Okay, so again, we've required a package CSV for creating CSV files. We created a header. We could have avoided this and just placed this value here if we wanted. But if you wanted to keep this in a configuration, if you're doing something more sophisticated or outside of this file or something, and read it in as a variable, then again we're simply looping over our materials and dropping that into a CSV file. And so we're now ready to run this. Okay, so process complete. You'll note when you run Ruby commands, it always prints to the console the return value for the last command run. In our case, the last command run is put s, which has a nil response, and so that's why you will generally see this nil result come back if your last statement's a print. And in my Manhattan folder, you will see test.csv. And if I open this up, I'm going to use Excel. Here you will see our simple little output where our headers are here. And we have our two layers that we're interested in. Now, notice layer 0 does still come through. You could filter that out if you'd like to have it not included. But here are the two values that we were expecting to see, or the two layers that we were expecting to see. Okay, so this is a toy example. What happens if we run this across something that looks more like a real project? So let's take a look at this deck structure from an earlier video that we did. And what we can do is come in and create some tags for this. So we have some already with the footers, but let's say we wanted to create 2x8 by 12 joists, or just call it joist. And as you're designing or developing this project, if you assign these tags as you're doing it and then make copies of it, it's a little more efficient than me coming back in to do this. We may have 2x8 by 16 rim joists. Tag those. Make sure they're tagged. There they are. Okay. Now, since this is the active project, we can just kind of slide this back over, select our application again here, and run it. And now you'll see that the output looks a bit different. And so here we have our new list. Of course, we still have this. We could, if we need to, throw a filter in to get rid of that. We have footers. We have our joists, and we have rim joists. Just a quick note on this layer 0. This is coming from the untagged material. So if we turn off things in here, so for example, let's add in drop beam, and then we can add in And you could do things like come in and say, add like an ignore tag to it, then filter for that tag. If we run this again, we won't take a look at the file, but we'll just run the process. Now you'll see that layer just has one entity, which is, well, now you'll see that layer 0 is gone. Open this file once more. Okay, so now you'll see that layer 0 is gone. We've added everything into its own layer instead of it falling into the default layer 0. So footers, drop beams. Again, you can change the level of description that you want here. And so that's how you can get a list out. It does rely on you properly tagging your material. Notice also that it's not dynamically capturing the dimensions. And so certainly if you look at something like cut list or more sophisticated applications that are out there, extensions that are out there, they can do a lot of these things. But I think it's very valuable to have this. This is pretty handy. I actually prefer to use something simple like this for a lot of my projects to get a list out, as opposed to going through some of the extensions that require a bit more effort to set up. And so as long as I tag my material as I'm going through, this is a pretty useful solution for getting material lists. So that's it. I hope you found this useful, or at least educational, and got some insights into using Ruby for SketchUp. So thanks and enjoy. Hey, if you're finding the channel useful or interesting, please consider subscribing. And if you have any feedback for any of our content, please consider leaving comments. Thank you.